back to another episode of Hustlers Highlights. What we do here on my channel is we discuss movies and TV shows and things within that space. So today we're going to be discussing Daredevil Born Again, Ep.7 on Disney Plus. This will be a full open spoiler discussion as we have on it with every episode of this series so far, this show so far. So without further ado, we're going to just dive right in here. So the show does open with Mayor Fisk, or Kingpin, in his office overlooking the city, and he's asking a question about what do they see the henchmen that he has, what do they see when they look over the city. They give a couple quips about, Starbucks, so forth and so on, but what Fisk really wants them to say, and he does tell them that you see a city in fear, a city in fear, gripped by fear by this mass vigilante or serial killer known as Muse. His right-hand man does mention that there was more that happened that night. At this point, Fisk understands that Angela, I think her name is Angela, the little girl who is White Tiger's niece, she had been rescued. And just a second, I'm gonna just look up her name here. She is not that heavily shown in this episode, but just for future reference, I do want to know what they call her. I think it's Angela. Where is it? Why is she not showing here? Anyway, can't find it right now, but it's neither here nor there. Either way, to the point though, they find out, Fisk finds out at this point in the episode that White Tiger's niece was not just found, but she was rescued. And she was rescued by what they assume was Daredevil. This is where you see a pretty big change in Fisk's face. He tries to confirm, are you sure it was him? They pretty much assure him, yes, there's no shadow. There's without a shadow of a doubt, it was definitely Daredevil. The girl name dropped him when asked questions about what happened that night. And she stated that Daredevil saved her. So Fisk kicks them out. Of course, he has some history with Daredevil, and he has a mixture. This really shows you Vincent D'Onofrio's range and just how great of a casting he was, even back when, for Kingpin, because you can see in his face that there is a slight bit of joy that Daredevil has returned, and then also a sense of dread. Like, he doesn't want this, but part of him does. Really good scene, really good. And it opens with this, so it's really, really nice touch. We cut from there to the opening credits, but then the next big scene we have in the show is we cut to Angela. That is her name. I did type it, so it is Angela. We cut to Angela having basically a fever dream from losing all that blood, and she's basically reliving the events that happened that led up to her being saved. And then Daredevil saying, I'm here, once she was eventually rescued. Honestly, I don't really know why they showed us that part, because they cut from that straight to a scene where Daredevil in his apartment with his girlfriend, Dr. Glenn. Pretty erotic scene, so I won't get into detail about that particular scene. But what does happen afterward is that we get a pretty good dynamic between Matt and her, and really just her expressing her concern for Matt showing up with bruises and being real distant and standoffish about certain topics. Obviously, she doesn't know that he has a Daredevil persona. He almost clues that he has like a second life. I don't know if second life's a good word for it, but he has a double persona, but she doesn't pick up on what he's putting down. Like, he really pretty much says, I used to have a separate life than this, a different life than this, and this life kind of feels fake. And you would think as a psychologist or psychiatrist, she would kind of pick up, like, what do you mean by that? But she kind of plays it off like she gets it, and, maybe he lost his friend, so she just moves on with that. But a really touching moment because it shows that she does care for him and she's concerned about the direction he's traveling in and that he may boil over trying to hold all those emotions in and just deal with it himself. Um, they do both share I love yous in this moment, which is pretty touching. But we cut from that to Fisk back in his office, and at this point, any inclination that he may be joyous about Daredevil has completely been washed over by just complete hate. He is almost losing it entirely in his office, and he decides that he's going to use his power as a mayor. And it leads me to assume that he means that task force at this point in the show to basically run down the Daredevil. And it's weird because you would think at this point he should be mostly focused on the Muse, but his hatred for Daredevil, excuse me, is so strong that he can't even focus on the main topic at hand. He's mostly concerned that Daredevil is caught and Daredevil is brought down because he has history and he does go over. Daredevil pretty much ruined his empire that he built, and he has a long disdain for Daredevil, and he wants to see that guy pay for it. We cut from that to Vanessa meeting with one of the gangsters, the lead antagonist gangster. I don't remember what they call him in the show, but it's not really important. Um, and he pretty much alludes to her or lets her know that he feels like there should be a change. He feels like it was ran better when she was in charge. And at the end of that scene, it kind of makes you wonder if Vanessa was siding with him because he basically says there needs to be a change. I feel a change in order. The change is due. And she says, "Are you asking for my permission or my help?" And he said, "It depends on which one you're offering." And then we cut from there. So makes you wonder at this point in the show, this point in this episode, if Vanessa's even thinking that maybe he's right. Maybe we should just go ahead and get rid of Wilson, and maybe I should be in charge of the family. And that does come back around later in the episode. But for now, we cut from that to back at the office. The lead detective, who was also involved in the hostage negotiation in the previous episodes, she comes in and she pretty much lets Kingpin know, Mayor Fisk know that they think they have their guy. They think this kid named Bastion is he pretty much has to be the serial killer. They found some canvas at the little cave thing that he had. Um, and turns out there was some pretty expensive canvas, and only 12 people could even afford to buy it who bought it in town, in the city. And they've interviewed 11, all besides this kid, Bastion, who also happens to have like an extensive um, history of being institutionalized mentally from mental illness. There is even a unsolved murder case on his parents' land that he seems to be directly involved in, but it was just uninvestigated. So the kid is pretty much a lockdown number one suspect. But while this is going on, turns out this is the same kid that asked Dr. Glenn for a session, a therapy session. And this kid's, during this portion, you see the therapy session going on. And it starts out pretty normal. Nothing really crazy is happening. But then there's a tonal shift when Bastion starts talking about uh, his past and then his parents forcing him to do taekwondo. And this is where the show does a good job because it kind of has the two situations with Fisk and the detective, and then Bastion and Dr. Glenn. Those conversations kind of intersect because you get the conversation about the taekwondo instructor who was found dead, and then you also get the conversation with Bastion and Dr. Glenn having a conversation about the Taekwondo instructor and him telling him how much he hated that guy, but he learned a lot from him. And at this point, you can really feel that if you were at all maybe hesitant to believe this was a serial killer, he pretty much is letting you know at this point that he is without a shadow of a doubt, the serial killer. They have the right guy in mind. But what really drives the nail home is that his nose starts to bleed. She hands him a tissue and he draws on a sheet of paper that's on her. Instead of cleaning his nose off, he just grabs the blood and draws on a sheet of paper the outline of the Muse mask. And of course, at this point, she realizes that she's in some trouble here. But luckily, while this is going on, Matt is looking at the little cave that he keeps the bodies in, or did until the cops found it. And he finds drawings of Dr. Glenn. And he feels with his face and recognizes that, feels with his fingers and recognizes that's her face. At this point, the action really picks up because now he's got Dr. Glenn knocked out, tied to a chair. When she wakes, she tries to plead for, don't hurt me. He even says, I can't guarantee you that. And he goes to cut her wrist open to basically bleed her out. And he has a sheet that it looks like he plans to do his final act of art there. Um, she does try to get away, but of course he overpowers her. And luckily, before things get really, really disturbing, because the cops are outside now and he's starting to semi panic because he had a plan and that plan is being derailed. It looks like he's pretty much going to just shoot her, and then Daredevil shows up. Thank God, because, and honestly, Daredevil beats this dude up pretty good. He gets a couple like little cheap shots in with a knife, but for the most part, Daredevil was giving him a one over. Really, really good one over too, especially because we all know that that's Matt, and Matt is in love with Dr. Glenn. So he walked in pretty concerned, or dove in pretty concerned through the window, and did not spare his punches with this kid at all. Him not knowing that this is a young man to start with, but either way, he's a serial killer. Um, he does beat the dude up pretty good. You think that the fight's going to just pretty much end with Matt beating him down, the cops coming in. The cops are making their way up to the stairs. When I say cops, I mean this vigilante task force. And it does beg the question, if the cops make it inside while they're still fighting, will they care who's the good guy or the bad guy? Because it doesn't seem that Fisk has trained them to think that way. If you're wearing a mask and you're a vigilante, you're a bad guy generically. So I don't know how that's going to play out moving forward. But in this particular circumstance, Dr. Glenn gets free of the news of the knots, and she actually shoots and kills him. So she does pass out, and Daredevil walks over to her, and we find out a few moments later that he did stabilize the cuts on her so she can get seen by medical medical staff once they arrive, because Daredevil at this point is already gone when the cops do actually make it inside the door, which is pretty savvy thinking on his part, because I don't think they would have spared any bullets on him at all based on what Kingpin has been training them to do. That's pretty much the culmination of all the action. The show's pretty much over. The episode's pretty much over at this part. But one interesting thing does happen. Vanessa does text the gangster, the antagonist gangster, and lets him know that Kingpin is at such and such street by himself, alone. And he does make his way that direction. And while Kingpin is eating, he walks up, pulls a firearm, begins to shoot, but then Kingpin's henchman is sitting in the dark and he fires. So I don't know if Kingpin knew he was coming, or if maybe he was tracking Vanessa's text messages and phone calls, so he knew she was trying to set him up. And then once they kill the antagonist gangster, Kingpin asks the right hand man if he will text Vanessa, call Vanessa, and see if she wants him to bring home dinner. So it still leaves the question open as to whether or not Vanessa tried to get him killed. They didn't just because Kingpin got the better hand or the better of him doesn't mean that he knew what was going on, or doesn't mean that Vanessa let him know what was going on. So interesting to see how they play it out next week. All in all, I thought it was a good episode. There has been some chitter chatter on social media about the episode. I don't know what that's all about. I thought it was a fantastic episode. I thought the small little bit of backstory they gave to Muse just gave him more character. It would have been silly not to give him a little bit of a backstory because he would have just been there at the in Dr. Glenn's office, just basically staring at her with nothing to say until he tries to take over. So it was a good thing they kind of let him flesh himself out a little bit, and they didn't overdo it. It's not like they gave us a 20-minute scene of him growing up and what his childhood. They didn't do all that. So I don't know what the chatter is online, but I disagree with it. I think it was a pretty fantastic episode, but maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Whatever your thoughts are on the episode, leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you have not already, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next episode of Hudson's Highlights. Take care.